Well, hello. Once again, we're continuing our Bible study on Matthew 18, problem solving in the church, or conflict resolution in the church, really. Last time we looked at the general context. The chapter opens with a conflict among the disciples. Who is the greatest? Jesus answers that by saying the greatest has to be the most humble, and then he goes on to talk about the problem of offending others and how severe that is. And so we're going to continue that study now and look at how do we resolve such things. So here we are again, going through Matthew 18, looking at conflict in the church and how to resolve it. It is a growing problem in churches today, so it's important to have a framework or a way of approaching these things from a biblical perspective. To look at the next section that has the practical steps to take, I'm going to have Phil read Matthew 18, 10 through 20.
Okay, the parable of the lost sheep. See that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders off, will he not leave the 99 on the hill to go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one sheep, than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. Then it goes to a brother who sins against you. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen to you, take one or two others along, so that other matters may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, treat him as if he were a pagan or a tax collector. I tell you the truth, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven. I think lost would be appropriate, but anyways, again, I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I with you.
Okay, thank you. A comment on the Holy Spirit there, an inspiration. It is a little bit unusual, but let's jump in at verse 10. It mentions the angels of those little ones behold the face of God in heaven. A comment about guardian angels and about people who have departed looking over those still on earth. There really is not a lot of evidence in the Bible about guardian angels. It talks about, or it mentions the guardian angels are ministering spirits to us. But we don't really have many examples of angels coming down and defending God's people, God's elect, God's chosen ones.
So ministering spirits, as in someone that gives us some guidance or tells us something? What do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, exactly. A lot of the times the angels come down with a message.
Okay.
In the New Testament, the angels are very busy during the Christmas story, during the announcement of Christ's birth. They also come again and minister to Christ at the end of his temptation, or actually during his temptation. And they're going to be coming with him in his second coming to help collect the good and the bad for judgment. Those are some of the tasks, some of the functions pictured of the angels. Again, they're all angels. They're not those who have departed. I know people get a lot of comfort from saying that, oh yeah, my grandmother is looking over me now from heaven. She's my guardian angel. Well, there's not really a lot of evidence for that connection. I guess there's really no harm in believing that.
Yep. And
some people get a lot of comfort from that, but I just wanted to clarify that our guardian angels are not the ones coming down and offer us great protection. It's more like they'll give us a warning about something or give us some guidance, and it's up to us to act upon it. And now, as far as the angels being in heaven regarding the face of God, first, if they're in heaven, they're not going to be real active down here. But what Jesus seems to be saying really isn't so much about they have guardian angels, but look how important they are to God. They have angels who are before God, seeing his face, regarding his face. That's something that human beings in and of themselves cannot do. That it's a pretty impressive idea that God has given them an angel that can stand in his presence. So he's gone from talking about the severity of offense to the importance of each believer. Then he goes on and talks about the familiar parable of the lost sheep, that if one sheep wanders off somewhere, the shepherd will go and recover that sheep. Now, in a lot of stories or depictions of that parable, you see this cute little lamb, and it might indeed be a lamb, although lambs tend to stick pretty close to their mothers. Jesus doesn't really qualify what kind of sheep he's talking about here. It's any sheep in the flock. It could be a lamb, it could be a ewe, it could be a big contrary ram. Doesn't really matter. Every sheep, no matter what their status, is important. So God is letting us know that everybody is important, and he will go and search after those who have been lost or those who have strayed. Some people have called God the hound of heaven, and this verse is one of those places that seems to depict it, that he'll go looking for you. He wants you to come back. If you really want to hide, that's, I suppose, a different story there, but usually sheep, once they realize that they're lost and in trouble, they're pretty happy to be found. They're not very good at problem solving themselves, so they're very happy when the shepherd comes to find them.
I mean, obviously, sheep like to be in flocks for security in numbers.
Right.
But obviously, I mean, when you put it towards humans, it's different. But when you're thinking about sheep, I mean, back in the time, they didn't have fences around their property, so it was just like a grazing situation.
Right.
But there wasn't a concern about the other 99 going off? Or
well,
some of the other 99, or?
I suppose that would have been an appendix to the parable.
Yeah.
You know, and when the shepherd comes back, he had two more to search for,
exactly.
you know. I guess we're assuming the good sense of the 99.
Right.
But in reality, with people, I suspect 2 or 3 might have wandered in the meantime.
Yeah. But I mean, God being able to do what he can do, he obviously doesn't ignore the other 99 like
Right.
a shepherd would have to.
Right, right. And usually shepherds aren't shepherding by themselves.
Okay.
There's often several shepherds together watching over the flock.
Okay.
So hopefully the other guys would have been alert enough to keep the 99 in place.
Yep.
And you also have to account for that one lost sheep. It's probably the least observant and most uncooperative sheep in the herd.
Probably.
Yeah, because somehow it slipped by everybody and got lost out in the wilderness. So, you know, the characteristics of that one sheep, all we really know is that it can get itself lost and get away from the shepherd. Maybe not the most appealing, but again, every sheep is important. So now Jesus goes on to the practical part of this passage about, well, what do you do when a problem occurs? And an interesting switch in perspective occurs. In the perspective so far, Jesus is talking about the offender, how serious it is if someone causes such an offense, if someone offends somebody else to the point of it's a detriment to their faith. And he talks about how important the lost sheep is, but now he switches to the practical, and instead of addressing the offender, he addresses the offended. The offended is the person who's been offended is the one who's supposed to initiate a solution. If your brother sins against you, go to him. Shouldn't it be that if you sin against your brother, you go to your brother? But that's not what he says. And I think there are some practical things to consider there.
Well, I think it's more like a situation where the brother that sinned against the other brother doesn't realize that it was a sin. That's kind of, at least when you start listening to all of it.
Yes, that's absolutely true. He may not have known what he did.
Or disagrees that it was,
Or disagrees, yep. Or even if he does, he doesn't know that it offended you. That's something that is a very personal evaluation. So you've got to own up to what happened and the effect that it had on you, and talk to the person directly. Now that's a little intimidating. Yeah. When someone offends you, it's kind of hard to go up to somebody and say, remember last Thursday when you did that thing? Really didn't sit well. We don't expect a good comeback. We don't expect that to go well. So what's really necessary is not just taking the initiative to address it, but being willing to listen and being willing to resolve things, which of course not everybody is willing to do. And if you go to someone and you present a problem or present the effect that something had on you, and they say, wow, I had no idea. I didn't mean any harm, but I'm really sorry. I'll think twice about doing anything like that again. Really, I'm sorry. I hope we can work this out. If the person responds that way, well, that's great. That's a very good response, and boom, the problem is solved. The case is closed. But not every conversation goes that well. And if it ends with something like, well, buck up and walk it off, that's not what we're looking for there. So if you're still upset, then it's time to take the next step, and it says take 2 or 3 witnesses with you. Today we'd call them counselors or mediators. People to make sure that what's being said is what's being heard, and also some people who will keep the facts straight, who will say, oh, no, wait, you said that you did this, but now you're saying you did that. I can't reconcile those. It's just objective parties to listen to the exchange and see what's going on.
Right, that objectiveness.
Yes.
Or lack of bias.
Correct. And have 2 or 3 of them there so that they agree on what's going on here.
Right. They all can collaborate.
That's right. That's right. I was in a situation one time where I was team counseling a couple with another counselor. And it was really very interesting because sometimes the other counselor and myself had different perspectives, but a lot of times she and I were seeing the same thing. Or we at least augmented each other's perspective. So it can be very, very effective. So if you go with a couple of witnesses, a couple of objective mediators, and one of the other party says, oh, is that what you're talking about? I didn't understand that. I'm sorry. Well, then again, you have achieved success, that you have restored the relationship. But if it still doesn't work out, if the person is saying, well, okay, I hear what you're saying, it really hurt your feelings, it really offended you, but I don't think I did anything wrong. I think you're the problem. Well, there are some situations where that may apply, but really that's not an appropriate response. In our world of personal rights and so forth, that might be what some people would say. I have the right to live my life. I have the right to do this. Okay. But that's a very isolated, individualistic view. We have an effect on other people, and we need to be accountable for that as well. Now, there are some people I have found in life who are simply an offense waiting to happen. That you can do almost anything, and they're going to be upset about it. And that is another story. But even those people need special consideration. We'll look into that another time. There are ways of handling that, but being tough and insensitive is not the Christian path to handling that. So we have someone now who's gone through basically a counseling session and still not willing to relent, still not seeing the problem. And so now it gets to a controversial step. It says, tell it to the church. And frankly, a lot of people who have been offended go directly to that step, but they'll tell the church one at a time. And usually such conversations are preceded with, don't tell anybody this, but.
Well, I think that's more of a gossip. I think they're looking for more like a church or court type situation. Pardon me. Obviously, you can't stand up in the middle of the sermon and say, hey, wait a minute, guys. Yeah, I had a problem with row 3 over there, so you really can't do that. That's not really going to help the situation, but the church has during a meeting or some sort of meeting that's happening with the church body, that's when it would kind of be, at least that's the way I thought of it when I read it.
Yes. Yeah. Is it
as opposed to a little gossip thing that you're mentioning. Right.
But I mention that because it's far more common than we want to admit. Say, well, I told the church one at a time, my side of the story. And so it doesn't have the objectivity or the transparency. Now, if you have a few people who have a serious relationship problem, my experience has been that people will notice. They may not have the details. They may not have all the details, but people will notice, and it will eventually have a group dynamic effect. Many people, you can go home, walk into your front door, and if 2 people in your household have had a disagreement, good chance you're going to get that sense. You may not know the details, but you're going to know, oh, this one's in a bad mood, and oh, that one's in the next room, and he or she's in a bad mood, and something bad happened here, and you might decide to leave the house. I don't know, but you don't have to have the story. Then again, you don't want to fill in the details yourself, so telling it to the whole church is a matter of transparency. It's like, well, you might have noticed that these 2 people are not getting along too well. There's some tension here, and we want to let you know firsthand exactly what happened from both sides so that everything is presented fairly and people are up to speed about what happened. Plus, the church does act as sort of a judge or a court situation, and they can say that, you're really being insensitive, or, okay, we can see why you did that, but we can also see why it offended this person, and we really want to encourage you to reconcile. They can take steps like that. If the offender still is completely unresponsive, then the next step is something that some religions have called shunning, or just church discipline. And it used to be a very common practice up until about 100 years ago. In fact, in our archives, there is a letter of discipline where an individual missed church for, I think, a month straight, and was seen at a local establishment that was not considered morally appropriate. And he was told to refrain from coming to church until he repented, and he had to publicly repent. Now that's tough stuff. I don't think we'd get away with that today. But the reason it was dropped, quite honestly, is that when churches started to show some decline, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, churches didn't want to tell members not to come. So the whole practice of church discipline fell by the wayside in favor of attendance.
Well, also, the whole point of the church is to heal to a degree. And if you're sinned, you can't really heal at church if you're not allowed to go. And so that's kind of counterintuitive to what the church is supposed to be doing. right?
Well, it is, although one can see this final step as a part of that process.
Yep.
Again, we have a person who's refusing to admit they need some healing,
Right.
that they don't see the problem, and they also run the risk then of doing a lot of other damage. Because if you're going to do something that offends someone, good chance you're going to offend somebody else.
And by offending someone, you mean it could be physical, like I took his sheep because I had to eat it.
Right.
You know, so therefore I owe you a sheep, but no, I don't, because I had to eat it. Therefore, I'm not going to give it back to you, or whatever.
Could be that.
It, not just, oh, you're nasty. You know, not like that. You know, oh, well, it could be like that, but it could be also more physical, or I stole from you in some way.
Could be.
Whatever,
In this context, it's the disciples arguing who's more important.
Right.
And so they're probably talking about how, each one of them is talking about how great they are and how not great the other ones are. Oh, how could you be best because you did this and you did that, and look at me, I did this.
Yeah.
That never goes well. That's never. And actually, in churches, I do find from time to time, people may not be that blatant about what they're saying, but sometimes you have an in-group and an out-group.
Okay.
And the in-group believes that they are the most important, the most influential, and people should follow what they say. Period. And that might only be 5 or 6 people, and you might have a church of 100, but they think they know best. Right. And nobody else's opinion really counts as much. So it does happen, again, maybe not without saying quite so much, and it is very offensive. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, a lot of things are felt without being said. That one sentiment that was expressed to me at one point by some people who were not in the in-group was that the attitude they got from the in-group was that they were second-class Christians. Right. Which, that's going to really encourage people a lot. Yeah. So you're protecting those who are remaining from a harmful dynamic.
Right. I mean, you can kind of see where the in-group is coming from. They founded the church or something to that nature. Mm-hmm. They are what the church, they developed this so they can practice what they believe to be right. Mm-hmm. So when other people come in, they want to teach them what they believe. And I don't know. I mean, I guess those people can change some too if they get some new ideas that they find are better, but they probably want to keep it the way they set it up to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually it has little to do with belief or theology.
Okay.
And it has everything to do with control and participation, recognition.
And importance in their mind. Right.
Yes, yes. I know one story. This is from my previous church. And one story where a woman bought napkins for the upcoming supper. Well, 2 or 3 people bought napkins.
Okay.
And they said, uh-oh. Well, and this person wasn't assigned or didn't say. She was going to just kind of, hey, I decided to buy these for you. Okay. And people said, you better use her napkins because she'll be really hurt if you don't.
Okay.
So that has nothing to do with theology.
Right.
But it does have everything to do with control and recognition.
Yep.
Those are my napkins,
Yep.
And so the church had an ample supply of plain napkins for the rest of the year.
Yep.
But that, again, that's the sort of thing. Another church, I have read about a case study where there was a cannonball stuck in the outside wall of the church.
Really?
Yes. It was from the Civil War. Mm. And for the older members, the established members, that was their claim to historicity. Okay. That was physical proof that they were there during the Civil War. Yep. And that the fighting came close. Well, to another group of people, that was just this ugly thing in the wall of the church causing this big streak of rust to run down. Nothing about belief. Yep. But everything about tradition, historicity, non-theological claims to fame. Mm. And that's the kind of stuff that causes offenses.
Okay.
Because the bottom line is, if you say that cannonball is ugly, well, you're stupid. You're not getting it.
Well, it can be ugly and still be important,
It can be,
you know?
but how important?
Right. And is it eventually going to cause the building to fall apart?
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? But it's, for a lot of people, a big rust streak isn't
Right.
going to be that. It's like, oh, look at that church with a rust streak. Let's go there this Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to be a real big part of the central mission of the church.
Yeah.
But another point about the shunning, about excluding them, it's making a point. It's not saying that, drive by their house and throw stones in their window.
Okay.
It's not a malicious shunning. It's just a boundary. It's saying, look, I love you, brother, but you can't do this. This is just a step of protection because you can't be doing this stuff around us. This isn't helpful. Yeah, okay, I hear your argument, but you don't see the bigger picture. When when Jesus says, treat them as a heathen or a tax collector, a publican, we often lose sight of the fact that Matthew was a tax collector. And I'm sure he was treated like a tax collector, and he became part of the Central 12. So the shunning experience, the consequence there, isn't meant to be permanent, but it's a therapeutic step to get the person's attention, to let them know the severity of what they have done, and to protect everybody else. Now, as far as the next section, it is connected, and I think it's worth looking at because it's that part where Jesus says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven or lost in heaven. And then in the next paragraph, he uses different terminology about forgiveness. So really, he's talking about accountability, that, hey, if the church gets together and says, you have to be accountable for your actions, well, in heaven, you are accountable for those actions. And if the church gets together and they say, we gotta let this thing pass. We have to get beyond this. It's forgiven. Well, then, it's forgiven. A couple of important points to consider in that is that first, the people are gathered in the name of Jesus. We use that term to apply to any kind of gathering, especially when attendance is down. It's like, well, we're really light in attendance today, but where 2 or 3 are gathered, so let's go. And that's true. That's true anyway, but in this particular case, it's talking about authority. When 2 or 3 are gathered in my name or under my authority or acting in my stead. To act in the name of someone or in the name of something is to carry their authority to the situation. So this is an authoritative step. And it also says you have to agree. Where 2 or 3 agree on these things. Now, you can get a whole room full of people together, but there's no guarantee they agree. There's no guarantee that they're all one on the matter. You might have, one person feels this way, and the other person's, well, kind of, but I also think this is true. And the rest of the room might be saying, well, let's just see who wins. We'll support that. We'll see which side wins. That's not agreement. That's not a unity or an accord. Everybody has to be together on that, and that's where the real power comes in. And again, this is a matter of accountability. Another, something else that we have lost in the church today, that you can kind of do what you want to do, and people don't say much about it. Now again, we shouldn't be morality patrol. That's not what it's saying. But when there's a group, a dynamic problem, the church really needs to be open to solving it effectively. And again, that solving is really, it's a way of bringing people back, of having them look at their own actions and bringing people back into the fold, into the dynamics in a healthier manner. And that's really what Jesus is aiming at here. A healthier, more positive, more helpful environment.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.